Hi and welcome to Danny After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight, I'll be featuring the case of Robert Maudsley. This was a suggestion by friend of the show, Nancy Farrell. Thank you, Nancy, for the recommendation. Now, let's go ahead and find out more. Let's go ahead and dive on in. Robert John Maudsley was born in June of 1953 in the Toxteth area of Liverpool. He was one of 12 children. He spent most of his early years in the Nazareth House, which is run by nuns and is an orphanage in Crosby, Liverpool. However, by 8 years old, he was back in the custody of his parents. But this was not the home life he expected it to be. Back home, he was beaten regularly until he was eventually removed by social services. Quote, "All I remember of my childhood is the beatings. Once I was locked in a room for 6 months, and my father only opened the door to come in and beat me 4 or 6 times a day. He used to hit me with sticks or rods, and once he busted a .22 air rifle over my back." End quote. As a teenager in the late 1960s, Robert lived in London and by that time was a drug addict. To support his habit, he was a rent boy, which is also known as a prostitute. He often suffered sexual abuse at the hands of older men. This had developed a hatred of pedophiles. He was finally forced to seek psychiatric help after several suicide attempts. It was during one of these meetings with his doctors that he had claimed he'd been hearing voices telling him to kill both of his parents. 1973, Robert was picked up by a man for sex, John Farrell. John showed Robert pictures of several children that he had abused. This caused Robert to fly into a rage, and he killed John. Robert was arrested and later sentenced to life imprisonment with the recommendation that he should never be released. So, this must be where the story ends, right? Not even close. 1977, Robert was sent to Broadmoor Hospital for the criminally insane. 1 year later, 1978, Robert killed a fellow prisoner, a sex offender named Salney Darwood. Robert had invited Salney to his cell, and then, once in there, he stabbed him to death. He hid the body under his bed to conceal it. Later, that very same day, Robert lured fellow prisoner William Roberts to his cell. Once in there, he hacked at William's skull with a makeshift dagger and smashed his head against the wall, killing him. Robert then calmly walked into the prisoner's officer's room and placed the dagger on the table and told him the next roll call would be 2 people short. 1979, Robert was then moved to Wakefield High Security Prison. Robert later captured a fellow prisoner, David Francis, and he tortured David for 9 hours. He murdered him, but prison staff didn't know this, and they were bargaining for the hostage's life. When the staff eventually got to David, they found his skull was cracked open and a spoon was wedged in his brain. Robert confessed to eating some of David's brain matter. Prison chiefs ordered Robert to be locked in a zoo-like cage, only with cardboard furniture and a concrete bed. So, Robert was transferred to the Parkhurst prison on the Isle of Wight, and he was put into this specially constructed cell. There has been much criticism over his living arrangements. Now, Robert is held behind bars in solitary confinement. Once a day, he's allowed out of his cell for 1 hour of exercise in a yard that is only 20 feet long by 12 feet wide. Every move that Robert makes is under the watchful eye of at least 5 guards. He is not to come into contact with any other inmates since being moved into that cell. That was over 25 years prior. March 2000. Robert wrote letters to the Times. He was pleading for the terms of his solitary confinement to be relaxed or to be allowed to commit suicide. The things he was asking for was access to classical music tapes, a television, pictures, and toiletries. He also asked why he was not even allowed to talk to other inmates, even just through a window. Quote, "If the prison service says no, then I ask for a simple cyanide capsule, which I shall willingly take, and the problem of Robert John Maudsley can be easily and swiftly resolved." End quote. 2022. Robert is now 69 years old, and he is still in solitary confinement. It is unlikely that he will ever be released from prison. So he will remain in isolation until the day that he dies. Robert once wrote, quote, "The prison authorities see me as a problem, and their solution has been to put me in solitary confinement and throw away the key, to bury me alive in a concrete coffin. It does not matter to them whether I am mad or bad. They do not know the answer, and they do not care, just as long as I am kept out of sight and out of mind. I am left to stagnate, vegetate, and regress, left to confront my solitary head-on with people who have eyes but don't see, who have ears but don't hear, and who have mouths but don't speak. My life in solitary is one long period of unbroken depression." End quote. That is the case of Robert Maudsley. Thank you for sticking around for another episode of Danny After Dark. Do you have any questions or comments on this case? Leave it down below. Let's be interactive. Do you have a suggestion for a case that you'd like me to cover? Leave it down below. You may see it featured in an upcoming episode. Until next time, remember, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us.